Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, I want to thank Flexo and SAP for organizing this event in Belgium. I already learned a lot today. Initially, my session was called Lessons Learned about Working with Components and Composite Controls. But last week, something happened. There was a new UI5 bus blog about routing in nested components with UI5. And one of the attendees and also speaker today knows how to push my buttons and send me a tweet, "Are your slides finished?" So there's been a change of plan. The new title is Deep Dive in Reusable Components. So I skipped the composite controls part and I leave my focus on the reusable components. So who am I? I'm Robin Panneels. I'm a technical consultant at Kangaroo Solutions. It's a Belgium-based SAP consultancy firm. My Twitter handle and GitHub handle is @rpaneel. And this session and all my demos will be posted on my GitHub account. They're currently private, but I will put them public afterwards. So, by a raise of hands, who already implemented and used reusable components in UI5? Okay, 2, so not a lot. So what is a component? A component, actually every UI5 application we build for the Fiori Launchpad is a component. Why is that? Because we use the component-based way of working. So each time, each application has a component.js in which we extend the SAP UI core UI component, which extends the SAP UI core component. So in theory and in reality, every UI5 application can be reused in another one. When we create a UI5 application, we always have a root view. But for a reusable component, we can always also expose a control. It can be a button, it can be something else, as the root control of the component. So when you create a component, we'll see the code later. When you do the init, call the init function, it will trigger the call of the create content function. If you have defined in your manifest a root view, so basically it will be your app view in which you have the split app or the single page app or whatever, then it takes that. If you don't, you need to implement the create content function yourself, and then you can provide this aggregation, which is you can only have one root control. So when you want to have multiple, be aware you have to put it in a container control at that point. What are the typical use cases for the reusable components using a control? Is search and value helps for table select, for example. Information dialog views, so a quick view on some link, or lists and tables, which you can reuse in different applications. For example, if you have something with materials and a list with materials, you can use it in a supply, in a purchase order application, or in a sales order application. So then you only write your table and your list and the implementations, you will only write it once. If you want to have more information and getting started, Nabi Zamani on his website has an excellent blog with all the steps and all the details about the use cases and the steps to get you started. So actually, reusable components are like Lego blocks. You take it and you put everything together, and then you can build a nice house, for example. In our case, a nice application. So why would you use a component versus a control? Components can create their own models. They can work with the backend, hence the OData model, and controls can't. Controls always use the binding of the application. So I'm first going to show you a little a demo first. So I have a Docker container with my local SAP system on it, on which I have a test application. This test application will be used later, but here on this input field, when I click here, what is opened is a table select dialog, which is actually a reusable component. So when I select, for example, Air Canada, this one is propagated. So when I go into the code in my library, and I open my library here, that's the reusable component you see. It's a carrier selector, which selects carriers. We have a manifest.json, like we do for a simple application type component. We have defined our OData service, and that's pretty much the only thing we have to define here. We don't have a root view, so when we have our component, we have metadata. The only thing I put in there is for this one, can I select one carrier or can I select multiple? So you can provide properties and events. So when I select, the carrier selected event is fired with the parameter carriers, and which is provided to the calling application. Now on the onInit, I just read the component data. I set my resource bundle and I call the init.apply. At this point, the create content method is triggered. Because we don't have a root view, we need to provide something ourselves. So in this case, I just create a dialog, which is the table select dialog. I provide all the parameters, everything that's needed, the binding to the events. It's all inside this component, and then I do the data binding. So now when we use it in our application, you only need to do a couple of things. The first thing is when it's a library, add it to the dependencies, your library, and then in the component usage part, add the specified component with the namespace. Here you see I provide the information about my button, about the multi-select. I set it to false because I only want to return one. In my controller, you saw that I used it. So on the onInit, because it's a dialog, I just add a function, a method to load the component. I create my component. I specify the usage, component usage, maybe that's better. I say, okay, load it asynchronously. It returns a promise. When the promise is resolved, then we have the component and we can add an event, attach an event listener to the event we will raise in the component. When there's an error, we want to show the error. So at this point, when the event is thrown, I just read the carriers and I put it in my local JSON model. Only one thing is here, when I push, I have in my component, I have a public method, open dialog, which just opens the dialog. That's the only thing. So that's a basic UI5 component. So at my current project, we went a step further. We created a component and we called it Attachment Manager. Why did we do that? Is because in pretty much each application, you have to upload attachments and delete attachments, link attachments. And in each application, you needed to implement all the functions and all the events for each and every one of the attachments, of the handlers. So why we moved this to a reusable component is so that everything scaffolding is in the component, every error handling is in the component, and then we link it in the application. We have just a couple of lines of code. So our initial goals was to create a wrapper around the upload collection. Then, because we use 160 in the later versions, you have an upload set, a new control. So we wanted something that would be able to switch it when we upgrade it, that we use the upload set at that point. This is not yet implemented, but it's on my planning for the next couple of months to do when I have the time. And then it's just to have a standard way of working with attachments in our project. So when I do it here, you will see when I add the information, the application ID is one of the parameters that needs to be passed. Object ID is for, maybe you don't need it, but if you have multiple attachment managers on the same application for different business objects, it can come in handy. So I provide this one. We have the AC, and then when I create attachment, the attachment is created. So when I destroy, I will take another one. For example, American Airlines. You will see the attachments are loaded. I can click on an image, for example, and because I don't only refactor my own code, but also my slides for talks, this was kind of necessary to add it in here. So you can do uploads. So I add it here somewhere, because every enterprise software needs docs. So you will see now the docs image is uploaded. You can download it. It just works out of the box. When I destroy it and put the instant upload on false and you show the URL button, we now have a button to add URLs. It will be temporarily. It's not yet created in the backend. And if we now add another second docs and on the sync, everything will be uploaded. So you have the UI5 link somewhere, and then the second one is a new docs picture. Delete also works, and so on. When we go into the code for that one, if I go open my library, it's basically the same way of working. So I defined, again, the properties. So I took the properties of the upload collection. I put it all in there because it's a wrapper around it, so we can pass it through. And then I have a couple events. I added number of attachments when they change. And then when I create, it's the same process. On init, we create the content, and then I provide a parameter. When it's legacy, the plan is to use the upload collections, what is seeing. When it's not legacy, we will use the upload set. Always destroy everything when the component is destroyed. And for this one, I have overridden the set property method. So the the root control is always created, but only when we have the three parameters that you see here. Those three are the most important one. Only when we have the three, we do the binding for that. So it's easy when you have a master detail list. When you change only the third, the object ID is passed in and the binding is refreshed at that point. The reason why I did this, the upload, I had to manufacture use promises to get everything. I had to enhance the upload collection control, because when you use instant upload, everything goes fine. But when you don't use instant upload, you have a couple of issues that you run into. So but the code will be on GitHub later today. Back to the slides. Reusable components is something nice, but you can also go too far, and trust me, I did. You can propagate your models from your applications towards your reusable components via the component container. So you have always a risk that you create a reusable component, but make it somewhat app-dependent, because you use the OData model from your from your calling application. So next time, your following applications should use the same entity sets, the same properties on the entities, so you can get in problems really fast. I did it with with my first tries to reusable component, and now I have, let's call it technical debt, but I know it, and I plan on changing it in the near future. So this was pretty much the initial version of my slide deck for this talk. Now, thanks to Tom van Doorselaar, I added some other things in here. So routing in nested components. At my current project, we are on 160. I will show it by running the application. It's a UI5 legacy, products legacy application. It's 160. Everything is local in this case. And I use a UI5 tooling to host my application. So when I run it, it's a products controller. It's a products application, which, when I refresh it, it contains of a list. And when you click on the list, you go to the details, and here you see information about the product. And in theory, when you click here, you should go back to the other one, but it's not implemented. So this is a basic UI5 application. Only thing what we have done is, let me open the correct one, close this one. In the 160, in the manifest.json, we added, in the detail view, we always added an optional parameter, parent, because the standard way of working with reusable components we didn't like at that point, of routing in components. In the new version, it will be all better. So we added a optional one, parent, so that everything that comes from that will be passed through to the reusable component. But basically, running this one standalone is just seeing the products. Now, when I change it and close this one and open the supplier one, and when I run this one, in this one, I defined a component usage towards the products one. So when I go in here, refresh, now it's the suppliers. You see the suppliers. When I click on my suppliers, you see here, this is the list of the reusable of my UI5 products component. Now, when I should click here, you should go forward, but that I did not implement it because I only knew I would want to show this last week, so I did not have enough of time. So how did I do that? Is on the supplier one, we have created a base controller in which we, in the onInit one, we listen to the onRoute matched event, and we call our own one. We keep the nav props, so the child and parent optional ones we keep in there, and we just, when we do the nav2 on my base controller, we call the router and do the nav2, but we first provide the information to the parameters so that everything is passed in a correct way. You will see here in the manifest.json, on the supplier one, we have our details, and then we have the optional one, child, in which when we go into the controller, when we select an item, when we press on an item, we take the binding context, we do this on our base controller nav2, we say we want to go to the detail route, we pass in for our own route, we pass in the binding context to the ID, and then we define the child route. So here I could have put just the default one, but I wanted to make sure that it's clear that I defined a special route in the manifest of the products one so that we can check it easily. Once this one is called, the base controller fires the routing. The only downside to this way of working is in the view, in the detail one, you will see we have to define our component container, provide the informations, and here is our component usage, which is defined in the manifest. In the new version, this is not necessary because that one will create the component for you when you ask for it. Here, we actually need to create it beforehand. So that's what happened in the 160. Now, when we go forward, I don't know, I still have a couple of minutes, I think. Okay, fine. So now, when we go to the newer version, so the 160, Tom wrote a blog about this. Tom initially set it up. We discussed at our customer at that point. We discussed a lot about it, how we could have made it better, how SAP could have made it better. But luckily, last week, it was in it before it, but last week, someone of the UI5 team wrote a blog post about it, and Graham Robinson, a sub-mentor from Australia, I think, created the sample, the tutorial for it, and the Git repo. So what I've done is I took it and I linked it with a no-data service. So you will see here pretty much the two same components as we had before on a 173 SAP UI5 version, and then another one on top of it, which is the nested one. So if we go here into products, when we click on a product, you will see the same screen as we've had before. When I click on supplier, this one doesn't work. When we go back to the landing page on the supplier, when I click on a supplier, for example, SAP, you will see here, okay, we have our reusable component as we have in our 160 version. But when we click on it, nothing works. Now, last thing I want to show it beforehand is the one here. We have two. When we go into our products, the product component is loaded. And you will see when we now click on the detail one and we click on the vendor, the supplier component at that point is instantiated and the routing is done towards it. When we go to another product, you will see it keeps on working. How did we implement it, or how did Graham Robinson implement it, and how it's on the SDK side, the documentation is once we're here in the products, it's pretty much the same. Only thing that's different is in the manifest, they define for the list a base path. It's also an optional one. When you don't provide it, nothing happens. In the unmatched of the list controller, they will look for the base path argument when it's provided. they add it before the pod and just add slash products. It's the OData pod behind it. When it's not provided, you only go to the slash products one. For the rest, on the products component, nothing else changes. In the supplier one, what you have here is you have the products component usage, which is linked, and then in the routing, when going to detail, you will see something in the target name products. You need to pass in a prefix for working with routing in components. And in the target, you will see now something like products type is a component. You define the usage. The parent is your parent route, which is detail. And then you can provide information from, okay, which control should I look into? Which aggregation of the control in the detail page should I put it into? And what's the name of the component in that item? So when we go and have a look into our detail view, in the 160, you noticed here on the end of the VBox, we had our component container. In this version, it's not necessary because it was generated for you. So in our component, how do they work? They added something like event mappings. So you define the component and you say, this is the route. And when you go to the route, you have two options. Either this component handles it themselves, or they say, okay, I don't know how to handle it. I will fire it again. And maybe I have a root another parent component which can handle it. So they implemented a base component for this. When the views of the router are created, they have a function in which they look at the component target info, and what they do is here, when they can handle it themselves, they just call it to their router. When they don't know how to handle and how to react to the event, they just say, okay, I'm firing it again. I take the parameters, I put it in there, and maybe somebody else can solve it. So it's basically reacting and anticipating to events. On the detail controller, you see we don't have anything to do with the components. And the last one is actually the nested one, is our main or parent component, which contains everything. You will see here they have done a lot. Is they have the two usages, and then they have defined one route for suppliers, one route for products, the S and the P prefix, which are necessary, and then they define the targets. So suppliers will go to the supplier component usage, which creates the component instance for you. Products will go to there. And then on the home screen, the only thing I did was look which button which line here was selected. When I click on suppliers, the supplier component will be open. When I click on products, the products component will be opened. So it's just nav2, and then everything will be implemented there. Here you will notice their event mappings. They have a lot. They have a lot of event mappings. So the reason why is they listen to the events that are raised by either the products component or the suppliers component. So you will see here, for example, when the products component, the link to the suppliers, when they fire that one, you will see here the component target info, meaning, okay, I have to look into the suppliers and I have to navigate to that specific role in that component, and I have to pass in this information. When then in that one, in the suppliers one, they click on the products, they want to show the products, then you need to go to that route in that component. Meaning this one, he can handle himself. For example, when we go to back to the supplier one and go to the component here, the forward just means I don't know what I don't know what to do with it, just you handle it. It's basically doing that. And you see here, you only have a home view, a home controller, and everything is handled for you. So on the home view, we only have the list with the 2 buttons, and then every component is instantiated when the route is hit. So only thing I still want to show you is when you're in supplier and you in the product details and you click on a supplier, you will notice here it's prefix S-P. It's somewhere in the code of the router, the targets that SAP UI5 knows, okay, I was on a component that was inside another one, so I just add the dash and the following prefix, and then I take the next route for the following component. So basically, there's a lot of information in that block, and for the 161 in Tom's block, it's more condensed, but I think SAP on routing in nested components is on the right track with the 172 release. I know it's 172. I don't know a lot of customers who will be on 72. My customer is still on 160, so maybe in the S4HANA systems, it will be in the near future that we can use the magic that is provided here. So if there are any questions.
The example from yourself, there you were using the components are part of your library, or it's just a component?
The routing one.
Yeah, the first example you showed.
The attachment, yeah, I put that one in a library.
Can you show the library of the JavaScript?
Yep. Okay, I need to open it. Open recent. The library.js file is pretty much the same because it's not here. It's in.
Do you define it as a control then?
Nope, it's in the embeds in the manifest.json.
Okay. But if in your library you have an array of controls, and then it's also listed.
Yeah, but this one is the extension on the upload collection. That's why it's there. I did not have to put anything in here. It's in the manifest. He looks in the manifest first, and he sees, okay, it's that. So it's.
And is it needed to be placed in a library?
No, this one I just put in there. The other ones, it's not needed. You just deploy it as an application, and then you can use the Fiori Launchpad does everything for you.
You could, for example, use the same app just as a standalone app, but also.
Yeah. It's only the attachment manager that I did, but for these ones are actually all standalone ones. So it doesn't change a thing. Even if you don't have a root view, you can work on that way.
Maybe just an idea, but could it be done now? You created another function of 2 functions in the base controller. Could it also be done by extending the router and creating?
I think that will be better. I think it would make more sense because now you're putting something in the component, in the controller which doesn't belong there.
So maybe we could just look in the UI5 router
Yeah.
of the latest version and put it
Indeed.
on the 60 version to have the latest version.
Yeah, but yeah, then you have to change everything, I think. Every other files that are needed, they change a lot of it. Because normally in the 160, I had a look this week, and there's something about components in there also, but it's not in the documentation, and somewhere in the targets, there's something that can create a component, but I haven't looked into it. So I think maybe they were working on it and didn't finish at that point because it's not documented in that version. So anybody else have questions? Okay, thank you.